It was the best of times. And it was the worst of times. It was the season of light. And it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. Those, of course, are the words, the first words of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, but they also aptly describe this morning's scripture. For Jesus picks Peter, James, and John to go with him up on the mountain, while the other disciples were left behind in the valley. Up on the mountain, the disciples get a foretaste of the power and the glory of heaven. There is Moses and Elijah. They appear with Jesus. They're discussing things to come. And as they do, Jesus starts to shine angelic from the inside out. Here on the mountain, everything is glorious. It's inspiring, faith, strengthening, hope, bolstering. Meanwhile, at the same time, down in the valley, a distraught father brings the other disciples his only son. A son who is tormented from seizures that convulse him, that throw him down on the ground until he shrieks with pain. Frantically, the disciples try everything they can to heal the boy, to bring him some measure of relief, but they fail. Again and again, they fail. And yet the disciples, as inadequate as they feel, as bad as it is, they stay with the boy. And they stay with his father throughout the night. Up on the mountain, Peter feels just so good. He wants nothing to change. He suggests that they build houses so they never have to leave. Down in the valley, there is an urgency for change. And this is life. Some have mountaintop experiences even while others are suffering. Someone's experience, it bolsters their faith, while another's experience drains it from their very soul. Some experience Jesus' divine presence and glory, while others are left wondering where he has gone off to. Is he ever coming back? Now, if we stop here in the story, who would you rather be? Which one of these characters would you prefer to be? Peter, James, John, Jesus on the mountain? Would anyone choose to be the suffering boy, the grieving father, the frustrated and failing disciples? The problem is, you see, we don't get to choose. Mountaintop experiences, they often sneak up on us out of nowhere. Sure, we can climb the mountain, but we cannot force such an experience to come. In fact, sometimes the harder we try, the more they seem to elude us. The same is true of low valley kind of experience. Certainly we don't choose those. We do everything we can, in fact, to avoid them, and yet, unbidden they come. Cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, Injustices of every kind and suffering, they come into our lives and they come into our world. And when they do, like the disciples left in the valley, we feel frustrated, powerless. It bleeds faith right out of us. Which is why Jesus rejects Peter's offer to live on the mountain. Instead, he leads the disciples down into that dreadful valley so that he can supply his faith when the faith of others fails. So that he can bring the light that shines in him into their hour of darkness. So he can bring his mountain into their valley. And the very next morning, Jesus heals the boy. He turns the father's grief into joy, restores the faith of the disciples. And once again, if we stop the story there, which one would you want to be now? Has it changed? Maybe. Maybe not. After all, you just may remember the rest of the story. For it isn't long before Jesus is betrayed, that he's mocked, stripped, beaten, and nailed to the cross. What you may not know is that a few years after Jesus' death, James is put to death by King Herod Agrippa. What you may not know is later still, Peter is crucified in Rome. You see, those on the mountaintop that day soon suffered very public, tortured deaths. Maybe that is why they were given the vision, for strength in their time of need. So now, who would you rather be? Looking into the lives of others for only a moment, from a distance, so often we think we can judge their lives, their choices, their experiences, their faith, but we can't. For we do not know the arc of another's life. We don't know what they faced in the past. We don't know what they still have to face in the future. In everyone's life, there are mountains and there are valleys, or there will be. In the meantime, what are we to do? If we were on a mountain, a spiritual high, then drink that moment in. Let its light fill you as it did Jesus, for you may need it on the road ahead. But also remember that like Jesus, don't stay there on the mountain. Have the courage to venture into the valley. Be a moonlight kind of person. A moonlight kind of person. That is someone who reflects the light of a sun not yet seen into someone's suffering night. And if you are engulfed in difficult times, if you're filled with grief or anger or frustration, then seek the subtle signs of the sacred. And when possible, offer those signs. A sign, the grace of a steadfast companionship alongside someone who suffers. The grace of how sometimes those times can bring a community together, can refocus them. The grace of someone to talk to cry with, to sing with, to hold our hand, to lend us their faith with a wordless gesture of compassion or of hope. This grace, although it was not the grace that was hoped for, was the grace that was always present in the disciples that long night in the valley with the boy and the father. It's interesting that Jesus orders Peter, James, and John on the way down from the mountain not to say anything to anyone about that mountaintop experience, not to say anything until his death and resurrection. You see, Jesus knows that there is a time of injustice, a time of hardship and utter despair coming. It's coming. And that is when the gift of the transfiguration is to be opened. For the gift of the transfiguration is a seed of sunlight planted in the soul that blooms in the darkest night. It is a reminder of the beauty, the power, the light that the disciples once saw, so that they can reignite it in their hearts once again. And through them, it can be ignited in others when they need it most, when it is the darkest. So this morning, what seeds of hope and light has God planted in you? What moonlit kind of people has God placed into your life? People who can reflect the light of the sun, a new day yet unseen, yet undawned, into your too long night. These are the subtle signs of the sacred. We are called to see them, to share them, to be them. For in them there is the offer, the space for healing grace. These are the ways that we prepare the way of the coming of the Lord. And in the meantime, before every mountain is made low and every valley is lifted high, before the crooked way is made straight and the rough ways smooth, these are the ways that finally all flesh will see the salvation of God. Amen.